My mother-in-law humiliated my mom at my rehearsal dinner in front of 12 people, 2 candles, a 3-tier lemon cake, and a pastor who suddenly found his water glass very interesting. She did it with a smile. That was the worst part. Not the words themselves, though they were bad enough. Not the 2 sharp little laughs that came from her end of the table. Not even the silence that followed. It was the smile. Like she had waited years for the right room, the right audience, the right moment to make my mother look small. My name is Joanna Ellis. I'm 29, and 3 weeks after that dinner, my mother knocked on Beverly Ashford's front door wearing work boots, heavy gloves, and a navy jacket with her company's name stitched over the pocket. Beverly opened the door, saw her, and went pale. But that part only makes sense if I take you back to the night before my wedding. The rehearsal dinner was at Magnolia House, a restaurant in Pine Hollow, North Carolina, the kind of place with exposed brick, polished silver, and servers who called everyone ma'am no matter how rude they were being treated. Beverly had chosen it. Of course she had. She chose everything that could be chosen without technically making it her event. The flowers in the private room, the seating chart, the wine. Even the exact shade of cream for the menu cards. She liked things curated. She liked rooms that reflected well on her. And she liked people even more when they did the same. My mother, Diane Ellis, was not a curated person. She was a real one. She owned a small emergency restoration company. Water damage, smoke damage, storm cleanup, salvage work, mold prevention, document recovery. When pipes burst, basements flooded, or kitchen fires left families standing in driveways with nothing but a trash bag and a dog leash, my mother showed up with industrial fans, moisture meters, gloves, and a practical voice that made panicked people breathe again. Beverly called herself a philanthropist. My mother actually helped people. But jobs like my mother's don't impress women like Beverly, unless they're the ones being rescued. And at that point, Beverly still thought she was the kind of woman disasters happened around, not to. She had been cool with me from the beginning, never openly cruel. That would have been easier. She was selective, measured, the kind of polite that leaves no bruise you can point to, only soreness you can't explain. The first time I went to her house with my now husband, Nathan, she looked me over and asked what neighborhood my mother lived in. Not in a curious way, in a zoning way. Later, she asked whether my family had always been local, which sounded harmless until she clarified that she meant whether we had deep roots in Pine Hollow. Nathan squeezed my hand under the table and gave me a, "Look, that meant don't take it personally. I fell in love with him because he was kind, because he was steady, because he listened more than he spoke and never made a show of being decent. He was an architect. He apologized when he interrupted people. He brought extra batteries on road trips. He once drove 40 minutes to help my mom move a broken commercial dehumidifier because it looked heavier than the estimate. He was not his mother, but he had been raised by her, and that mattered more than either of us understood at the time. By the time of the rehearsal dinner, Beverly had already made it clear that I was acceptable because Nathan loved me, not because she had chosen me. She referred to our wedding as your little weekend, twice in 1 month. She asked whether my mother was still doing cleanup work, as if restoring damaged homes after floods and fires was a hobby that had gotten out of hand. I should have heard the warning in that. Didn't. That night, my mother wore a dark green dress she had bought on sale and then tailored herself because the sleeves were too loose. She looked beautiful. Not flashy, just composed. Her hair was pinned back. Her lipstick was soft rose. She had the calm face she always wore when walking into a stranger's worst day. I noticed Beverly seat her at the far end of the table. I noticed. I said nothing. That sentence could summarize more of my 20s than I would like. Dinner began well enough. Toasts, laughter. Nathan's older cousin talked too long about marriage being the real group project. The pastor told a story about my father teaching Sunday school 20 years earlier, before the heart attack that took him. My maid of honor, Celia, made me laugh hard enough to snort into my napkin. For about an hour, it felt manageable. Then dessert was served. Lemon cake, fresh berries, coffee. And Beverly began doing what she always did when she wanted control of a room. She started visiting people one by one, making little side comments loud enough for everyone else to hear. She complimented Celia's earrings. She asked the pastor whether church attendance was finally recovering. She told Nathan's aunt that her blazer looked expensive in a tone that somehow made expensive sound suspicious. Then she reached my mother. She sat beside her, smoothed her napkin, smiled. "So, Diane," she said, loud enough for the whole table. "I realize I've never asked what you actually do all day." The room shifted, not dramatically, just enough for me to feel it. My mother set down her fork. "I own a restoration company," she said. "Emergency home recovery. Water, fire, storm damage, mostly." Beverly tilted her head. "Oh," she said, "so you clean up people's messes." Two people laughed. Not because it was funny, because Beverly had made it socially dangerous not to. My mother didn't flinch. "Yes," she said. "That's one way to describe helping families save their homes." Beverly gave a tiny laugh and looked around the table. "Well," she said, "someone has to do the dirty work." I don't think I breathed for 3 full seconds. Celia stared at her plate. The pastor looked uncomfortable. Nathan's hand found mine under the table. My mother smiled then, but not the kind of smile Beverly expected. Not a surrendering smile. A grounded one. "The work is dirty sometimes," she said. "The people aren't." And then, with more grace than anyone at that table deserved, she turned to the pastor and asked whether his granddaughter had gotten into Duke after all. Just like that, she changed the subject. Just like that, she saved the room from the ugliness Beverly had brought into it. And I let her. That is the part that stayed with me after the wedding photos, after the flowers died, after the thank you notes were mailed. I let my mother save the room. I let dignity do the labor while I sat there burning. The dinner lasted another 30 minutes. My mother spoke when spoken to. She drank coffee she did not want. She complimented the cake. She laughed once at something Nathan's cousin said, and I could hear how carefully she placed the sound. When we left, she hugged me in the parking lot and told me to get some sleep. She said, "Tomorrow is your day, Joe." I wanted to say it should have been hers, too. Instead, I nodded. Then I watched her walk to her truck alone. The wedding itself was beautiful. That is true. It is also true that beauty and damage can live in the same day and barely acknowledge each other. We got married under white oak trees on a lawn behind the inn. Nathan cried during the vows and then looked embarrassed for crying, which made me love him more. My students' parents came. My mother danced with me to "Stand By Me." Beverly wore pale champagne and kept calling it taupe. If you had only seen the wedding, you would have thought everything was fine. That is how families like Nathan's survive so long. They photograph well. The trouble started after. Not all at once. In layers. Beverly didn't apologize. I didn't expect her to, but part of me thought Nathan would insist on something. A correction. A private conversation. A line. Instead, he kept trying to make the event smaller than it was. She was out of line, he told me on our mini-moon 2 days later. "But that's just how she jokes when she drinks." "Then why didn't anyone laugh like it was a joke?" I asked. He had no answer for that. A week after the wedding, Beverly hosted Sunday supper. My mother was not invited. Neither was that surprising. What surprised me was Nathan asking whether it might be easier not to push things right away. "Push things?" I repeated. He ran a hand over his face. "I just mean maybe everybody needs a little cool-down time." Everybody. As if my mother had done something equal and opposite at that table. As if the room had held 2 offenses instead of 1. I looked at him then, really looked, and saw something I hadn't wanted to see before. He wasn't defending Beverly because he thought she was right. He was defending her because he had spent 34 years adapting to her weather. He knew where the storms were. He knew how to move around them. And in his mind, that counted as peace. It didn't. But I didn't have the language for that yet. So I did what women raised by good mothers and loved by conflict-avoidant men too often do. I compensated. I called my mother more. I drove by with groceries she didn't need. I brought up the rehearsal dinner twice, and each time she gently redirected. "Joanna," she said the second time, while labeling plastic bins in her office, I know what happened. Her office was a converted den attached to the warehouse she rented on the edge of town. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with drying logs, thermal cameras, intake folders, restoration estimates, water damage report. It smelled faintly like paper and cedar, and the industrial citrus cleaner she used on everything. My mother was not ashamed of her work. That fact somehow made Beverly's insult feel even cheaper. Mom clicked a pen shut and looked at me. Your job is not to stay angry for me, she said. I should have said something. You should have, she said calmly. But you didn't. So say something next time. I stared at her. Next time? My mother went back to sorting paperwork. There's always a next time with people who don't believe they crossed a line. She was right. 3 days later, I learned Beverly had been discussing my mother's job with half her book club. I found out from Nathan's aunt, Sandra, who cornered me near the bathroom at a baby shower and said, very softly, I thought you should know Beverly has been saying your mother runs some kind of disaster janitorial business. I actually laughed when she said it. Not because it was funny, because my body had no better response. To humiliation, arriving in installments. Sandra looked stricken. I'm sorry, she said. I should have spoken up. You should have, I said. Then I softened, because she at least had the decency to look ashamed. When I told Nathan that night, he sat at the kitchen counter in silence for a long time. I'll talk to her, he said finally. It was the first promise he made that sounded like one. But when he did call her, I could hear from his side of the conversation how quickly she turned the room. He began carefully, calmly. Mom, you can't talk about Diane like that. Then came Beverly's voice through the phone, sharp even from across the kitchen. Nathan closed his eyes. No, that's not what I'm saying. Pause. No, I'm not attacking you. Longer pause. Mom. When he hung up, he looked exhausted. She said she was complimenting your mother for being hardworking. I just stared at him. She said that? He nodded, but even he looked embarrassed repeating it. I set the dish towel down and leaned both hands on the counter. Nathan, your mother insulted my mother at our rehearsal dinner, then told people she cleans up other people's lives because she couldn't do better with her own. His head snapped up. What? Sandra told me. He went completely still. That was the first real crack. Not because he hadn't believed me. Because now, the cruelty had escaped the room where he could minimize it. Now it had a second witness. A week later, I finally stopped waiting for him to handle it his way. I drove to Beverly's house alone. She lived in an older part of Pine Hollow where the lots were deep and the mailboxes looked inherited. Her house was white brick, with black shutters and a front door painted that severe glossy red. Wealthy Southern women seemed to think signals charm. She opened the door in linen slacks and looked genuinely surprised to see. To me. Joanna, she said. What a nice surprise. It's not, I said. The smile on her face did not disappear. It cooled. Well, she said. Should we at least pretend to have manners on the porch? I followed her inside. The house smelled like lemon polish and expensive candles and old upholstery no one was allowed to really lean on. She led me to the sitting room, not the kitchen. Of course, people like Beverly prefer confrontation in decorative rooms. I'm here about my mother, I said. Her expression changed by a degree. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Enough for... I see. You don't get to speak about her like that. Beverly crossed one leg over the other. Like what? I almost admired the commitment to performance. At the dinner, since the dinner, to your friends, to your family. You don't get to make her work sound shameful because you don't understand it. Beverly gave me a long, almost pitying look. Joanna, I think your sensitivity on this topic comes from wanting very badly for the two families to be equal. I just stared at her. She went on, gentle as a knife. And they aren't. That doesn't make your mother a bad person. It simply means people come from different worlds. There are sentences you remember in your bones. That was one of them. I stood up so fast the side table rattled. My mother walks into flooded houses at 2 in the morning and helps families salvage what they can of their lives, I said. You host luncheons. Beverly's cheeks lost color. I had finally said something. She stood too. How dare you? No, I said. How dare you? I left before she could recover enough to rearrange herself into the victim. My hands shook the whole drive home. That night, Nathan said I should not have gone without telling him. And that was when I understood we were not arguing about his mother anymore. We were arguing about whether I was allowed to respond at all. The following Tuesday, at 6:12 a.m., Nathan got a call from Beverly's neighbor. A pipe had burst in the upstairs bathroom sometime in the night. By the time anyone discovered it, water had come through the ceiling, down the walls, into the den, the living room, and the hall closet, where Beverly stored family albums, tax boxes, old letters, and her late husband's drafting journals. Nathan was out of bed before the call ended. I was right behind him. We drove over in yesterday's clothes, neither of us speaking much. When we pulled up, Beverly was standing in the driveway in a robe and rain boots, though it hadn't rained. Water damage has its own weather. Two neighbors stood nearby, murmuring. The front door was open. I could hear the alarm system beeping from inside, and the wet slap of someone walking on soaked hardwood. The house looked violated. Not ruined. Not yet, but injured. Beverly saw us and put both hands to her chest. Oh, thank God, she said to Nathan, and then her eyes shifted to me. The ceiling is dripping into Gerald's office. Inside, the upstairs bathroom looked like a failed experiment. A copper line behind the vanity had split. Water had run for hours. The hallway runner was soaked through. The wallpaper in the den had begun to bubble. The built-in shelves were damp. The framed photos on the console table had curled at the edges. Most people have no idea how quickly water becomes a second emergency. It isn't just the flood, it's the hours after. The hidden spread, the insulation, the baseboards, the trapped moisture behind the wall that doesn't look wet yet. Nathan was trying to help by turning off breakers and moving boxes when Beverly's insurance adjuster finally called him back. He asked a series of practical questions, then gave the name of a preferred emergency restoration list. I was standing close enough to hear, and I knew the first name before he said it. Ellis Recovery and Restoration. My mother's company. Nathan. I looked up at me. I looked back at him. Beverly was across the room wringing her hands, still in that pale blue robe, still dripping panic. Who is it? She asked. Nathan swallowed. It's Diane's company, he said. The silence that followed was one of the purest sounds I have ever heard. Beverly stared at him, then at me, then back at the spreading water stain on the den ceiling, as if reality might have changed while she wasn't looking. There must be another one, she said. Nathan checked the list again. There are others farther out, but they can't get here until tonight. Maybe tomorrow. Beverly's face tightened. The adjuster had explained what delay meant: secondary damage, mold risk, swollen floors, warped cabinetry, unrecoverable paper loss. Water is not emotional. It just keeps moving. Nathan looked at me. I knew what he was asking without him saying it. Would I call her? I wish I could tell you I hesitated because I wanted Beverly to feel what it meant to need someone she had mocked. I didn't. I hesitated because I knew exactly who my mother was and exactly what she would do. I stepped into the kitchen and called her. She picked up on the second ring. Morning, Joe. I looked through the doorway at Beverly, who had gone very still. Mom, I said. There's been a pipe burst at Beverly's. It's bad. A pause. Then, practical and immediate. How long has the water been running? I turned to Nathan. Probably since late last night, he said quietly. She thinks since midnight, I told Mom. Any standing water still active? No. Mains off. Hardwood? Yes. Paper storage? Yes. Another pause. Shorter. I can be there in 25. That was it. Not one comment, not one reminder, not one earned little silence. She was already moving. When I stepped back into the den, Beverly looked at my face and knew. She's coming? She asked. Yes. Something unreadable passed over her expression. Not gratitude. Not yet. Recognition? Maybe. The kind that comes too late and still arrives all at once. My mother pulled into the driveway 23 minutes later in her company truck. Two crew members followed in a van loaded with fans, extraction mats, plastic sheeting, moisture meters, dehumidifiers, tool cases, protective floor covers, labeled bins, and the kind of experience wealthy people never respect until it is standing on their lawn at dawn. My mother stepped out in work boots, dark jeans, and that Navy Company jacket. Beverly was still on the porch. My mother walked straight up to her. "Good morning, Beverly." No edge, no softness either. Just clean professional distance. Then she added, "Show me the source first." I do not think Beverly had ever been addressed so neutrally in her own life. She moved aside, and my mother entered the house she had been considered too low class to decorate. If you have never watched a real professional take control of a crisis, it can look almost rude at first. There is no ceremony to competence. My mother did not ask Beverly whether she was all right every 6 minutes. She did not circle the damage making sympathetic faces. She did not perform concern. She assessed. She directed. She got to work. Within 10 minutes, the upstairs vanity was open, the damaged drywall marked, the water path mapped, the salvage zone identified, and the den divided into wet, damp, and priority recovery areas. She gave Nathan a pair of gloves and put him on document transport. She had one crew member start extraction upstairs and another protect the office contents. She sent me to the kitchen for clean towels and plastic bins. She told Beverly very politely, "I need the floor clear and decisions quick. Water doesn't wait." And Beverly, who had never in my life taken instruction well from anyone, nodded. That may have been the first miracle. The second came an hour later. Nathan was moving boxes from Gerald's old office when he found one of the bottom cartons soaked through. Inside were rolled plans, engineering sketches, letters, and a leather portfolio. The whole lower section was saturated. He called for my mother. She came in, knelt, opened the box, and her expression sharpened. "These can still be saved," she said, "but only if we separate them now." Beverly had followed us down the hall. When she saw the contents, she made a sound I had never heard from her. A break in the throat. "Those are Gerald's," she said. "His hand drawings. His first ones." My mother looked up only briefly, then stopped standing there and helped me. Again, no cruelty, just instruction. Beverly dropped to her knees, not gracefully, not symbolically, literally. There on the floor of her own hallway, in a silk robe she had not changed out of, beside the woman she had called dirty in front of a pastor, Beverly Ashford began handing over damp paper one sheet at a time while my mother laid each piece flat, interleaved absorbent paper, labeled the order, and explained the drawing sequence to Nathan. "Do not peel anything apart if it resists," she told him. "Support the corners. If ink transfers, tell me." Her voice was calm, steady. The same voice she had used with me after bike crashes, fever nights, and one bad breakup at 19 when I thought I would never stop crying. Beverly watched her hands work. Really watched. Hours passed like that. Emergency extraction. Air. Movers. Inspections. Inventory. At noon, my mother finally stood, flexed her back once, and asked Beverly if there was a utility sink she could use. Beverly pointed mutely. By then she had changed into slacks and a sweater, but she still looked displaced in her own house, as if disaster had stripped the room of its usual deference. Celia dropped off sandwiches at 1 because I texted her that we'd be there all day. Beverly began to say she wasn't hungry. My mother cut in without looking up from the drying rack she was arranging in the dining room. "You need to eat now," she said. "We're not done." And Beverly, after half a second, sat down and ate half a turkey sandwich in silence. I cannot explain how shocking that felt. Not because my mother was being harsh, because Beverly listened. Around 3, the insurance adjuster arrived in person. He walked through the house with a tablet, nodding at the equipment. "Diane," he said when he saw my mother. "Good. If you're on it, we'll probably stay ahead of mold." Beverly heard that. He looked around again. "Hard hit, but salvageable." "Good call getting here early." My mother just nodded. The adjuster asked whether the document box in the office was worth sending for specialty drying. My mother said, "Absolutely. There are original pencil plans in there, and handwritten correspondence. We caught it in time. He approved the line item without argument. Beverly stood by the staircase with both hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from. Her face had changed, not softened. Exactly. Stripped, maybe. Status is easy to perform in a dry house, less so when your ceiling is open and someone else is saving your dead husband's life's work. At one point, she stepped into the dining room where my mother was labeling salvaged items. "Diane," she said. My mother kept writing. "Yes?" There was a pause. Then Beverly said, "Thank you for coming so quickly." My mother capped the marker and looked at her. "This is what we do." That could have meant the company. It could have meant her. Maybe it meant both. The work continued for 3 days. Day 1 was emergency stabilization. Day 2 was removal, drying, documentation, and salvage transport. Day 3 was the walkthrough, the part where the true cost becomes visible. Baseboards that had to come off. Insulation compromised behind one wall. Lower cabinet damage in the upstairs bath. Hardwood likely recoverable. Office contents mostly saved. Mostly. Not all. There were 3 photographs from Gerald's early years that had fused beyond repair. When my mother told Beverly gently, clearly, without drama, Beverly sat down in the den and cried. No performance, no audience, just grief, private and old and immediate all at once. My mother handed her a tissue and then went back to work. That was the thing Beverly could not seem to get over. Not that my mother was kind. Kindness can be patronized. It can be dismissed as softness or weakness. It was that my mother was useful, decisive, skilled, respected by every tradesman, adjuster, and subcontractor who walked through that door. By the end of the 3rd day, Beverly knew everyone else in the room saw my mother differently than she had. And worse for Beverly, they had probably always seen her differently. Late that afternoon, when the last crew member loaded equipment into the van, my mother stood on the porch filling out the final moisture log. Beverly opened the front door. "Diane." My mother looked up. Beverly held the door a little wider. "Would you come in for a minute?" I was in the driveway near the truck. Nathan was returning a call by the mailbox. Neither of us moved. Something about Beverly's face told me this part was not for us. My mother stepped inside. The door remained open just enough for me to see shadows, not expressions. They were in there maybe 5 minutes. When my mother came back out, her face was composed, unreadable in that familiar way that meant she was containing more than she planned to share. Beverly followed her onto the porch. Her eyes were red. She did not look at me. She looked only at my mother. "I was wrong about you," she said. My mother adjusted the strap on her equipment bag. "Yes," she said. That was all. No rescue speech, no gracious absolution. Just truth. Beverly's face folded in on itself for a second, not from humiliation this time, but from contact with something solid. My mother went down the steps. At the bottom, she stopped and turned back. "And for the record," she said, "I don't clean up people's messes. I help them keep what matters." Then she got in the truck and drove away. I stood in the driveway with tears in my eyes so sudden they felt like weather. Nathan came over and took my hand. Neither of us spoke until Beverly quietly went back inside and closed the door. Then he said, "I should have defended her." "Yes," I said. He nodded. "I know." And for the first time since the rehearsal dinner, I believed he did. 3 days later, Beverly asked if she could come by our house. Not for dinner, not socially, to talk. Nathan looked at me when she texted. "What do you want to do?" he asked. That question mattered more than he realized, because for the first time, he was not asking what would keep things calm. He was asking what I wanted. "Tell her she can come at 6, I said. She arrived exactly on time. No perfume cloud, no bright lipstick. No social armor beyond the one she had built into her posture over decades. She sat at our kitchen table, the one with a scratch near the corner from when Nathan tried to assemble a bar stool without reading the instructions. Real-life table, not decorative room. She folded her hands. Then she surprised me. Not by crying, by being direct. "I was cruel to your mother," she said. Silence filled the room for a second. Nathan sat beside me but did not speak. Beverly looked at me, then down. I said what I said at the rehearsal dinner because I wanted the room to understand where I thought your family stood in relation to mine. I appreciated, if that is the word, that she did not hide behind misunderstanding. She kept going. My father worked maintenance for the county. My mother cleaned rooms at a motel outside Durham. I spent half my childhood pretending not to know them in public places where I wanted to seem like I belonged. I stared at her. Nathan did too, clearly hearing some of this for the first time. Beverly gave a humorless little laugh. Yes, there are things I never told either of you. Her hands tightened. I built my life very carefully. And somewhere along the way, I decided that becoming respectable meant never again being associated with the kinds of jobs people look down on. She looked up at me then. When your mother answered me at the rehearsal dinner, she sounded proud. That made me angry. Not at her, at something in myself I thought I had buried. It was, in its own way, one of the ugliest things I had ever heard. Not because it was false, because it was probably true. I let the silence sit there. She deserved to feel it. Finally, I said, "Do you know what the worst part was?" Beverly swallowed. The joke? No. It was that my mother had more dignity in the 1 minute after you insulted her than anyone else at that table had all night. Nathan's head dropped. Beverly nodded once. Very slowly. I know that now. I wanted to ask whether now was too late. Whether now counted for anything after the damage was done. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. Have you said that to her? No. Then this conversation isn't finished. Beverly closed her eyes briefly. I didn't think she would want to hear from me. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because people like Beverly always mistake avoidance for consideration. If you really understand what you did, I said, then you don't get to hide from the discomfort of saying it to her directly. Nathan finally spoke. She came when you needed her, he said quietly. You can make the call. Beverly nodded. She left 15 minutes later looking older than when she arrived. I called my mother after she drove off. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, Well, that sounds unpleasant for her. I actually smiled. Aren't you nervous about talking to her? I asked. My mother was quiet a beat. No, she said. I know who I am when I walk into that room. That sentence landed in me somewhere permanent. Beverly invited my mother to lunch the following week. Mom accepted, not because Beverly had earned quick forgiveness. Because my mother was not afraid of difficult tables. I was not there for the lunch, but my mother told me enough afterward. They met at a small cafe near the courthouse. Beverly arrived early. My mother arrived on time. Beverly apologized without excuses the first time, and then, after my mother sat in silence long enough for her to hear her own words, apologized a second time more honestly. Not, I'm sorry if you were offended. Not, I didn't mean it that way. Just, I wanted people to think I was above you. I wasn't. My mother told her that explanation was not the same as repair. Beverly said she understood. Mom told her repair would have to be public, because the insult had been public. I nearly applauded when she told me that part. 3 weeks after the flood, Beverly hosted a family brunch. Not elegant, not strategic, almost awkwardly ordinary, which was how I knew it was real. There were 14 people there, including the same pastor from the rehearsal dinner, Nathan's aunts, Sandra, Celia, and 2 of the women who had laughed. Beverly asked to say something before food was served. She stood at the end of her dining room table and held the back of her chair. The room quieted. At the rehearsal dinner, she said, she had insulted Diane Ellis and demeaned her work in front of everyone present. She said she had done it again in subtler ways after that. She said she had been wrong not because Diane had later helped her, but because the work itself was honorable and difficult, and she had been too arrogant to see it. Then she looked directly at my mother. You saved things in my house I thought were gone, she said. And you did it without making me smaller for needing you. I don't know that I would have done the same. My mother sat with her hands around a coffee cup and let the room breathe. Then she said, Probably not. A few people laughed, startled and relieved. Even Beverly did a little. Then my mother added, "But you can do better from here." That was her version of mercy. Not denial, not sentimental healing, expectation. The meal after that was strange in the way healthy things sometimes are at first. No one knew where to look for a minute. Then the pastor asked my mother about storm season. Sandra complimented the quiche. Nathan's aunt asked for my mother's business card because her church had a fellowship hall with recurring leak damage. Life resumed, but not unchanged. In the months after that, Nathan got clearer with his mother. I did too. We did not become one of those magically healed families where every Christmas photo means the tension has dissolved. Beverly still liked control. She still had to work not to rank people in a room. She still asked one too many questions about neighborhoods. But she never again spoke about my mother's work as if it were beneath anyone. And Nathan, to his credit, stopped asking me to absorb disrespect in the name of peace. That mattered. My mother kept working. She kept answering calls at odd hours, wearing boots into broken houses, helping strangers save what they could. One Friday afternoon in late October, I stopped by her warehouse with coffee and found her teaching a 19-year-old new hire how to dry books without warping the spine. She had one glove on and a pencil tucked behind her ear. She looked up, smiled. "Hey, baby." I stood there for a second, just looking at her. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," I said. "Just thinking." "Dangerous hobby," I laughed. Then I walked over and hugged her, careful of the glove. All my life, I had thought my mother's strength came from endurance, and some of it did. But that wasn't the whole thing. Her real strength was clarity. She never needed a room to agree with her before she could know the value of what she did. That was why Beverly's insult had landed on the room harder than it landed on my mother. My mother had already decided, years before, that she would not be defined by people who had never carried what she carried. She knew who she was in dry houses and ruined ones, at decorated tables and on wet floors, with people who respected her and people who didn't. That kind of self-respect is louder than revenge. It just takes longer for some people to hear it. If anyone ever asks me again what my mother does for a living, I won't wait for her to answer first. I'll tell them myself. My mother helps people keep what matters. And that is more than most people can say.